Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio. I've got a really interesting gentleman to introduce you to tonight. Gordon McIvor is his name. He's a seasoned business leader with over 40 years of experience in public and government affairs, real estate, property, and governance. And he's held numerous senior management roles throughout his career with Canada Lands Company, the National Executive Forum on Public Property, as well as completing assignments with the World Bank in India and Colombia. But interesting enough, he's more known for his extensive volunteer work. And we're going to talk about that at length today. He has presided over the Empire Club of Canada, the Canadian Club, the Alliance Française, the Couchiching Institute on Public Affairs, and the Communications and Public Relations Foundation of Canada, to name just a few. And it's interesting that Gordon has been so involved and known for his volunteer activities, even though he's had such a stellar business career as well. Gordon, why did you get involved? Welcome to the show, by the way. But why did you get involved
Thank
in
you.
so many
Thank
different
you.
volunteer activities?
I've always been a person that loved volunteer activities and the idea of volunteerism. Ever since I was a little kid, I mean, I was the guy that, was the first out at setting up different organizations for my grade six class. And, it's just something I've always really been interested in. And as I got older, my father became the president and CEO of Imperial Oil Limited, which at that time was the biggest company in the country, or one of the two or three biggest companies in the country in terms of capitalization. And he taught me something about people in the business world that surprised me. He said, people in the business world that become experts in a certain area and then go on to become the CEO or the chair or whatever, one of those top positions, don't necessarily have a very developed worldview because their energies have been very narrowly focused in the area of business that they excelled in. And my dad was a great believer in being kind of a Renaissance man, having a universal vision of the world. And when he was president and CEO of Imperial Oil, he used to tell me that every week he would have a lunch where he'd invite someone that had nothing to do with the business whatsoever, just so he could widen his understanding of the world. So he'd have Margaret Atwood one week, and what's Margaret Atwood got to do with oil exploration? Nothing, right? But it taught him how to see his world through a whole bunch of different prisms, which in his eyes made him a better CEO. Likewise, for me, the lesson I took from that is that by volunteering in areas outside the area where you chose to make money in, i.e., your career, you're going to get a much wider and deeper understanding of the world, which not only will make you a better human being, but it'll probably end up helping you actually in your narrow business pursuits. So that was my philosophy from a very early age that I learned from my dad, and it's I think served me quite well.
And do you think he actually did have a different lunch with a different person every week?
Every week he did. It was his pride because other CEOs, I mean, that's something even in today's world you don't hear very often, right? You don't hear about the CEO of a bank, having lunch with an artist one day, and unless it's a real personal interest, right? But my father just really the idea was to expand his horizons, and
I think
through
it's a great idea. There's a good book called that Never Eat Alone, which you may have may
I
have heard
have
of and read. But the challenge there is so many people eating at their desk and rushing, and now Zoom meetings scheduled at noon. It's difficult to get out once a week, let alone every day.
Well, time management is always a supremely sought after skill for sure, especially in today's world where we measure our time in minutes as opposed to hours. And it is a high pressure world. But when you step back from it, you often realize that about 90% of your activity is really not that tremendously important. It's stuff that you get into and you start doing. It's the other thing I learned from my father is it sounds like he was my hero, and I guess in a way he was certainly a big influence on me. But he used to say that the most productive time of the day for him in an office was when he shut the door, turned off his computer, or in his day, I guess it was largely before computers, but turned off whatever, and just thought about what he wanted to accomplish that day, people he should talk to move things forward, the strategic things that were not fully developed within certain areas. So he would just sit and think. And in today's world where there isn't a lot of time left for thinking, we're doing all the time. We're turning on that Zoom meeting you referred to, and then rushing to do the six people follow up that we have to do right after that meeting. That's kind of the way the world's become. And unfortunately, one of the byproducts of that is there's not a lot of time left for thought about what is it that you really want to accomplish in your life, in your career. What are the people that you want to touch, and what people do you not necessarily care that much about whether you touch them or not. So, things like that to me are very important. I try and reserve a certain part of every day just for, I know it sounds corny, but just for thinking,
I think
thinking
it's
about
a,
where I am in the world.
I think it's a great idea. I
So,
have to admit, one of my regrets is that my most productive times are early in the morning before,
yeah,
before I go to work, where I start working and doing exactly what you're talking about. Because once I'm at work, I get inundated by emails and meetings and things like that.
yeah.
After work, when everyone else has gone home and they stop interrupting me, even though the interruptions are critically important and helpful. And then the ironic thing I find is that I'm incredibly productive on airplanes. And when I'm traveling, and I sit and I go back and I shake my head and I say, why was I so productive? And it was because I had a couple of hours of uninterrupted time to just get things done and to think about things and to write things and read reports that I hadn't had a chance to read, etc. It's unbelievable. Anyway, let's turn to the Empire Club. So you got involved in the Empire Club and have been involved for quite a long time. Tell me about why you first got involved in the Empire Club, sir.
Oh my gosh. Well, my memories of the Empire Club go back literally to my youth. It was always something that I thought was kind of a rarefied atmosphere where the leaders of society gathered to discuss our future. But really, my first really specific memory was when my father spoke at the Empire Club. He actually spoke twice at the Empire Club, and he came home after the first time. I would have been in my teens at the family table, and he said, "Well, I can retire now. I've reached the ultimate goal in anyone's life. I've spoken at the Empire Club." And in the 1980s, that probably was a fairly dominant feeling in the business community. Like, if you were invited to speak at the Empire Club, you had made it. Like you were a leader among leaders. And it was a bit of a rarefied atmosphere. So that really kind of struck me. My own dad telling me that the highlight of his career had occurred at a speaking platform. That was a bit curious, but I thought very interesting. And then a couple of years later, I got invited to the Empire Club for my first lunch. And lo and behold, I was like 10 feet away from Audrey Hepburn. She was the guest that day. And it was not lost on me that I was sitting in front of what was arguably at the time the most famous movie star on the planet. And she had come to the Empire Club to talk about her role with the United Nations as an international youth ambassador, and she wanted to get that. Obviously, she wasn't talking about her film career and my breakfast at Tiffany's. That's not really what the Empire Club was about. But I was so impressed that I had actually seen and heard Audrey Hepburn that I remember making a mental note to myself. I will be back to this place. This is a really interesting club, and then I got involved and long before I entered into any leadership role, I remember being invited to a private reception for Vladimir Putin when he was in Toronto, and and in those days, Vladimir Putin was in one of his very rare manifestations of his career, or if you want to call it, of his leadership, where he was really interested in making partners with Western countries. That phase did not last very long, you will recall, but when he came to the club, that was his objective. He talked a lot about the importance of Western partners for Russia, which you certainly would not hear coming out of his mouth today. So anyway, I remember meeting him. I do remember on a very personal level being struck with how dead cold his eyes were, like they just sort of looked bore through you like you weren't there. But it wasn't also lost on me that I was meeting one of the most famous human beings on the planet again after Audrey Hepburn, right? So this sort of reinforced this idea that this was the place in Canada where you go to meet leaders, where you go to have, and it used to be the moniker of the club, to have conversations that matter, right? Quote unquote.
Right.
And that actually became the moniker of the Empire Club of Canada. So those my earliest memories of my dad, Audrey Hepburn, Vladimir Putin, all kind of led to me having an incredible interest in becoming involved. Then I started my career. I ended up being the president of some very interesting things like the Kuching Institute on Public Affairs, which used to be the most famous public affairs forum in the country. Started in
That's
the
like a
1930s.
summer retreat where people go and sort of like what was that thing in Upper New York State where you went and you got all the
Yeah, yeah,
seminars from intelligent people?
that's right. Exactly. It was very similar, and it was on Lake Kuching near Aurelia, and beautiful. It was always the second weekend in August, and the most
The
important things.
Chautauqua.
That's right. You got it. And at Kuching, you always knew that the important conversations were held, late in the evening, sitting in an Adirondack chair or a Muskoka chair next to the lake, and you'd be talking to John Kenneth Galbraith or something, by the lake, and that led me to want to become involved in other public affairs organizations. So I ended up becoming president of the Canadian Club, and at that time, that was a much stronger club than the Empire Club. It was the number one club in the country. I don't think that's true anymore. I think the Empire Club is actually either certainly surpassed them or giving them 100% run for their money, because the Empire Club is doing really remarkably well right now. But anyway, that's for later.
And
I,
rivals,
I
no?
they were like bitter rivals for a long time, bitter rivals, because don't forget, this was pre-internet. And where Canadians went to get their information in those days was the Canadian Club and the Empire Club. I mean, those were where you really went to get source information from leaders. You did not go on a Zoom call. You did not, you didn't check into an internet site. None of this existed. So it was a very different world. And I know the Empire Club, when they recruited me, probably saw that I'd run the Canadian Club and probably thought, well, this guy probably knows this business, probably be some help. And so I came on, I think I joined the club around 2011, I think it was. And yeah, and I've never regretted a day of it. I think
Now,
it's a
take a
remarkable.
step back if you could. Is there a different positioning between the Empire Club and the Canadian Club? Are they
No,
the same thing, or do
no.
they have different positions?
I mean, it was always run differently. There was one huge difference, and it really became, to me, the cutting edge advantage of the Empire Club, and that is that we were a club of record. So from 1903, when we were set up, until today, every word ever uttered at the Empire Club, including the intros by the president of the club, and the thank yous by the sponsor, everything has been recorded. So when you go on to the empireclubfoundation.org, which is the site of the Empire Club Foundation, and all of our archives, every speech going back to 1903. Brian, it is literally parallel history to Canada. Like, this is all source documentation. This is not stuff that historians are writing about history. This is the people that made the history talking about it at the Empire Club. So, for example, when Alexander Graham Bell came to the Empire Club, by the way, it wasn't to talk about the telephone. He'd invented that a few years earlier. He actually came to talk about a machine he'd invented to locate dislodged bullets in soldiers returning from World War One. We would probably call that an X-ray machine in today's world, or a form of an X-ray machine. But he talked about that at the Empire Club, and that kind of set the tone that the club was going to attract these leaders, not only Canadian leaders, but world leaders passing through Canada that would come to the club. When Bill Gates came to the club, for example, that was a big deal because he was at the height of his power. And everybody wanted to be there. It was a really hard ticket to get that day, right? To hear Bill Gates at the Empire Club. But that's really the type of speaker we've always been able to attract, because they know that, first of all, we have a history. We're reliable. We aren't something that was set up 2 years ago that may disappear next year. Um, Number two, people can look at everything everyone said. They can go on our website, or before that, we used to have red books that we'd send out every year. I don't know if you personally remember, but every year for over 100 years, the Empire Club would send out at the end of each season. Our season ends June 30th, a red book with all the speeches of that year in it. And thousands and thousands of Canadian business leaders would collect these books in their office or their personal library. And then, of course, we went to the internet, things like Red Book publishing became somewhat perfunctory. So we moved to the digital age, and now everything, of course, is on our website. You can have a Snapchat thing with it. You can have a bot read it to you if you want. You can do anything on our website. You can have it translated into any language you want. So you want it in French, press a button, everything's in French, going back to
Fascinating.
1903.
So I've had the
So
pleasure of going to several Empire Club and Canadian Club lunches. I always
uh,
had this impression that for some reason the Empire Club, had a monarchist kind of tilt to it. Is that fair or not?
for a long, long, long time in our history, that would have been absolutely accurate. But let's talk about what's happened to the club, because clubs don't survive for 122 years by not changing. That's just about impossible, and it'd be like a business not changing its business model, for 120 years. Well, it wouldn't be around, right? And
And you
it's the
said
same
that
with
there
the
was
club.
a reinvention of the club really after you joined in 2011. So maybe that's, maybe you had something to do with it. We'd be interested to hear that. We're going to take a break, though, first of all, for some messages and come back in 2 minutes with our guest, Dr. Gordon McIvor, who's going to be telling us about the history of the Empire Club, the Canadian Club, his involvement, how it has evolved over time, and the role of really civil society in our country's history and volunteerism, because I think that all of those topics are really quite interesting. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Dr. Gordon McIvor. He's got really quite an illustrious business career, but what we're talking about today really is his volunteer activities, primarily with the Empire Club and the history of the Empire Club. And I think an outgrowth of this conversation is going to be the role of a club like the Empire Club in civil society, and the role of volunteerism, and really how critically important it is to building a dynamic society. Gordon McIvor, welcome back to the show. You were just about to tell us
Thank you.
how the club reinvented itself. Tell us a little bit about that, if you could.
Yeah. First of all, I certainly wouldn't take credit for the reinvention. It was a big team effort. We had outside consultants. We had the full board involved in it. But look, when I joined the club, it was in bad shape. It was struggling for relevancy. It was not making money. Every year was, are we going to make it, kind of thing. And coming from the Canadian Club, I was aware of that, because the Canadian Club, when I was the president there, I remember, I'd hear about the Empire Club as kind of the poor sister, right? So when I arrived, though, I saw that they had a remarkable board, like really invested board in the Empire Club, and they set to work in reinventing themselves. Number one, get rid of the traditions that no longer make sense in today's society. So, there was a time when our tradition was to not allow women into the club, for heaven's sakes. Like, that's a good tradition to get rid of, right? And like most other organizations in Canada, we did get rid of that silly rule
Not
in
in
the
2010,
1960s.
before 2010.
Oh, in the 1970s, which was
Thank you.
still far too late, still far too late. But it wasn't just the Empire Club; it was the same at the Canadian Club and all of the clubs around Toronto. There were. I mean, we forget how different a world it was back then, particularly for women. So there's a good tradition to get rid of, but we also wanted to move away from this British centric thing that we had. We were definitely very aligned with the monarchy, and by the name, the Empire Club. But and a lot of people, by the way, have asked, why haven't we changed our name? Well, it's because we really wear this historical name with pride. Because in 1903, you got to remember, when we were set up, Brian, there was no such thing as a Canadian citizen. Most people forget that, right? We were all British subjects living in Canada. Um, so and why was the Empire Club set up? It's really important to understand that, to see why it had to get rid of some of this vestiges. The reason the Empire Club was set up was in 1903, the Canadian Club already existed. I know it sounds like the Canadian Club should be younger than the Empire Club by the names, but the Canadian Club actually goes back to 1897. And in 1903, we were a break off from the Canadian Club. We actually broke off and formed this new club. Why? Because in 1903, if you know your Canadian history and American history, that was the year Alaska was annexed by the United States. And Canada owned the coastline, the part of the Pacific coastline of what was going to become Alaska, the newest state in the United States. So of course, we were very upset that the United States was going to try and take this land from us. So the countries both appealed to what was known as the International Boundaries Tribunal in London, England. And we, of course, expected them to side with us because we were, we were part of the British Empire, for heaven's sakes, and we were upholding it. But they didn't. They sided with the United States, saying you can't have a state without access to a coastline. It just wouldn't be economically viable. Therefore, we are awarding this coastline to the United States, to Alaska. Canadians were furious. There was a big discussion across the country. And at the Canadian Club, they began saying, well, to hell with Britain. They're not protecting our interests. We should consider joining the United States. And there was some speakers brought in to talk about that. And the men at the Empire Club, what was to become the Empire Club, and I say men because again, there were no women, unfortunately. That would occur many years later. But we left and we went across town to this very elegant, famous restaurant called Webb's Restaurant, which was located at Yonge and Melinda Streets, where that one King Street West residence is now. That one King Street West condo and residence, a very tall, skinny building. Anyway, that used to be a bank, and before a bank, it was a restaurant, and the restaurant was Webb's, and that's where we started having our meetings in 1903. The reason we wanted to break off was because we wanted to remain loyal to the British Empire, to the form of government in place at the time, and did not want to join the United States. Now, some Canadians might say, well, why didn't you just choose the third option, which was to become an independent country of both? And the reason for that is because we weren't ready in 1903. We didn't have the infrastructure, we didn't have the national communication systems. We were still very, very dependent on Britain for a lot of things. So, but that would come a little bit later. As you know, Canadians began to sort of have a big self-identity after the First World War, when they realized their separateness, their identity as Canadians from British, but that was to occur later, right, in 1918.
This is interesting history. We've heard just recently, obviously, because of President Trump's affiliation with President McKinley, who I think was 1870s, 1880s, 1890s time period.
Yep.
And there was that he had President McKinley a real desire to annex Canada at the time. I didn't realize that there were business people in Toronto that were supportive of that idea. And at the Canadian
in
Club,
1903.
how long did that continue?
Not very long. It was a discussion. It caused a lot of emotion, but at the end of the day, Canadians realized that our history and our family ties were far greater with the United Kingdom than they were with the United States. So that discussion did go away. It didn't linger for years or anything, but it was the origin of the Empire Club of Canada. That's what caused us to set up a club.
Background. I never heard that, and it's interesting how history repeats itself sometimes. Okay, go
Yes,
on,
it is.
sir.
It is. So right away, we started. You had to be a British subject to be a member of the Empire Club. We capped it at 500 members, $1 a year. And there was a huge waiting list, by the way. Like right away, we got to 500, and then there was a huge waiting list. And we knew we were onto something, obviously, like it was working, right? And then we started having these superstar speakers that would come in, like uh, shortly after we were founded, like literally within a year, we had Sir Sanford Fleming, who had just invented the concept of time zones around the world. He used to, at that time, by the way, he lived on College Street at the corner of College and Mutual Streets. That's where Sir Sanford Fleming's house was. But he was probably the most famous Canadian subject, right? He was a superstar. He had come up with the time zone idea. He had come up with sending cable information underseas on the cable networks, and had linked Olympics in Australia and the results of the Olympics with the other Commonwealth or Empire at the time destinations like London and Toronto, Montreal. And within hours, we had that information. In 1903, that was like, wow, right? To have information from Australia on the results of the Olympics, like hours after they occurred in 1903, was a pretty amazing feat in the context of those times. So we had him. He came to the Empire Club. All to say that very quickly it became a place where the establishment of Toronto realized they had to be there. And not just to hear people, but to be seen with all the people that were going to be there as well. Because it became literally a place of the powerful, where you went, if you were a leader in Canada, you went to the Empire Club of Canada and it was recorded. You knew that your speech would be forever available going forward in time. It was recorded in all the newspapers at the time. It was reported in newscasts on radio. I mean, this was the Empire Club when it celebrated its 50th anniversary in 1953, Brian. It was radio broadcast around the Commonwealth for our 50th anniversary of the Empire Club. And there were literally probably hundreds of thousands of people that heard that, right? So and it makes me sound like I'm saying the Empire Club used to be much more important than it is now. That's not my message. My message is that we were very, very important in a certain context in the pre-internet era, because that is literally how Canadians accessed people in power and heard from them firsthand. There was not a lot of other ways to do it, right? You didn't turn on CNN and watch the person being interviewed, right? It didn't, none of that existed. So you went to the Empire Club. And so today, for us to have survived through all these changes, we had to go through what you started asking me earlier about this great transformation, which we started around 2010. And it involved getting rid of a lot of what we considered traditions, but no longer really reflected the reality of Canada. For example, why were we British centric, right? Already in 2010, clearly Canada was not British centric. We were just as invested in Punjabi Sikhs and Muslims and the Black community and all those the multiple aspects that make up the richness of our society. So we realized this thing about singing God Save the Queen every week is probably going to have to go, right? Like it's not. I mean, we love the monarchy. We were aligned with them for many many years, but we want to survive. We want to continue being relevant, and we have to represent all Canadians, not just those of Anglo-Saxon descent. Number two, we did away with the Lord's Prayer, which caused great consternation at the time among some people. But you see, the way that happened is that our speakers increasingly weren't Christian. I mean, it started off with, we had some Jewish speakers saying, excuse me, but really, I don't want to hear a prayer about Jesus. Like, I'm a Jewish speaker. At least you could have a rabbi on stage. So we started doing that. And then we had First Nations, and they wanted a spiritual leader from their camp. And then one day we had atheists that started showing up and saying, we find it offensive that you're doing a prayer. So anyway, slowly we realized that really speaking club doesn't necessarily get invested or should get invested in prayers and national anthems and all this type of stuff. We will, or sorry, not national anthems. Sorry, anthems to the Queen. I mean, national anthem is fine. So we really changed a lot. And what changed the most, Brian, was our board. We went from having uh, white men in 1910, primarily white men on our board, to now our board is a real reflection of what you would see if you walk down King Street, Queen Street, Bay Street, whatever in Toronto. You would see a true representation of the country. So when you have a board that's like that, that's going to impact the speakers that you get. So right, so you're going to get a lot more representation from various ethnic and cultural communities around the country, and I believe that's why the Empire Club has not only survived, but it's flourishing. It's flourishing today.
So it flourished. So how often does the Empire Club meet today, and how does one find out who the speakers are, and how does one get invited to go?
Yeah, so you don't need to be invited. It's anybody can go to the Empire Club, and the meetings are usually virtual and live, and they're once a week, and usually once a week. Sometimes it's only once every 2 weeks. Occasionally, there's two meetings in 1 week. It just depends on when speakers are available. Although, just parenthesis, if I may, that changed dramatically during the pandemic, when increasingly we realized the speaker didn't have to be in the room. We could do it remotely, right, through virtual technology. But so it's generally once a week. You don't have to be invited. You just go on the empireclubofcanada.org, and it's got the first thing you can check into is upcoming events, and you can sign up for any event, either to attend live or to attend virtually. The thing I would say about why we're flourishing, though, is not the virtual part. It's very handy to have that virtual part, and you can reach people all across the country as opposed to just in one lunchroom. But the reason people love going to the club is it remains one of the places you would go to meet a whole bunch of people in the sector being discussed that day. So let's say you're interested in artificial intelligence and its impact on the legal system. Well, guess what? We have a lunch on that, right? And if you are there that day, you're going to meet every lawyer involved in artificial intelligence operating in Canada. So important, you want to be there. It's a real schmooze fest to be able to get there and to meet all these people involved, not just the speaker, but everybody in the audience is interested or involved in that specific area. So, we deal like your own radio show. We deal with a totally different topic every week, totally different. And the importance is to be able to market to all of those different demographics so that you're actually reaching them. And that, by the way, our marketing program is a state of the art piece that I'm very proud of. But it's, to reach so many demographics so that they actually come out was a big part of our transformation between 2010 2025.
Fascinating conversation. We're going to take a break for some messages. We'll be back with our guest, Dr. Gordon McIvor, in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Back in 2. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Dr. Gordon McIvor. He has been very involved in the Empire Club, which is the topic of discussion tonight, but he's also been involved in the Canadian Club and a 30, 40-year career in business. Sir, I want to ask you, if I could, to take a step back. You've been very involved in business. You've been involved in both the Canadian Club and the Empire Club. There are numerous ways that people can get involved. There's other clubs downtown Toronto. There's the Albany Club, which has historically been thought of as the place where conservatives go. The National Club, which might be sort of liberal oriented. There's the Toronto Club, which is where the senior echelons of banking get together at.
Yeah.
There's different industry clubs where people would get together.
Yeah.
Why is the Canadian Club, and particularly since you're here tonight about the Empire Club relevant with all of that, opportunities to go? And, I'm a business person myself. I don't work in the downtown core. For me to think about going downtown to go to an Empire Club luncheon, I got to leave half an hour before it starts. I've got to dedicate, 2 hours, an hour for the lunch, an hour for the speech.
Right.
And then you
Right.
say the big opportunity is the networking and the schmooze fest. I got to dedicate time to that. Why would all that make sense for me as a business person or just a person in society in Toronto?
Well, obviously, a lot of people in your situation do watch Empire Club events virtually. That's very common because we perfectly understand you can't come to an event if you got other things planned that day and you aren't right downtown because we all know getting around in Toronto is an art form that sometimes tests our patience. So, but yeah, for sure, if you can get there live, you're going to have that benefit of having not just the speaker that you're learning from, but everybody in the room. The people at your table. There's always a reception before. There's a lot of impromptu meetings after. But quite frankly, a lot of business gets done at the Empire Club. I mean, a lot of people, reach out to people they haven't seen in a couple of years and go, "We should get together and talk about this," and it leads to things. I've got like innumerable reports of people following up successfully on business concepts through contacts they made at the Empire Club. So there's that. And I would submit to you that a trip across town, if you think you're going to accomplish a business objective, is probably worthwhile. You're not just going to hear a speaker, right? So, but why volunteerism? Why do people volunteer for the club? I think they're just fascinated by meeting people that are shaping our society, and particularly young people. Like we have so many volunteers that actually come up to us and say, "I'd like to do more. Like, let me do more with the Empire Club." And it's one of the reasons that we're launching a new version of the Empire Club Foundation in a few months, which will really speak not only to youth but to those people traditionally that haven't had a voice at the Empire Club. And we've been moving, Brian, in that direction for a while. Like we used to, all our topics used to be business and politics, and that was fine. But today's society is infinitely more complex than that. So now we started to have lunches like during the pandemic on, what is the experience of being a Black woman and mother during the pandemic? What special issues do you have? Well, that particular event was a huge success. We're having an event I'm involved in a couple of weeks from now on longevity. What makes certain of us live far longer? And we're not talking about blue zones here. We're talking about Toronto. Like what causes some people among us in Toronto to live to 100 and others, we struggle to make it to 70. Well, that's we're doing an event on that. It's not the type of thing the club would have dealt with before, right? So we've expanded our scope, and by doing that, we're expanding the people that we're attracting as well. And a lot of the people we're attracting are youth. So we want to, through the Empire Club Foundation, which will become more active, we want to have a whole set of activities for young people so they can actually be part of the Empire Club and hear and get their voices being heard at our podium. So that's going to be really exciting.
You
I'll just give you an
described,
example. Yeah, sorry.
apologize, you described to me before we got on that the secret sauce of the Empire Club is volunteerism. Why is
Yep.
that secret? You know, there's other clubs where people are paid. Why is volunteerism so important?
Because when young people, particularly students, join our volunteer ranks, and there's a whether it's checking people in or being ambassadors for the club, being representatives to the club in their universities or schools, whatever. The reason that they want to do that is because they're stimulated by the great number of new ideas they're hearing at the Empire Club from speakers and people they meet at their tables and in our receptions. So, if you're an artificial intelligence engineer and you're 26 years old working in Toronto, you might feel a little bit isolated. You might go, I know lots of people in my area, but I don't know the bankers and the lawyers and the show business people that are involved in AI, and I'd like to expand my knowledge. The Empire Club is perfect for that because you're gonna meet people from all those sectors that are attending to hear the speaker on AI, and you'll network with them, and you'll begin to set up personal friendships. I've made so many friends at the club that I still have today, because nothing is more passionate than talking about ideas that are really important to you. And the Empire Club is all about ideas. It's all about here's the way things are. This is what we think is happening, why they're the way they are, and here's a prognosis for how we're going to go forward, depending on what options we choose. And for a young person, that breaks the isolation of his computer or her computer and opens it up to real people, real relationships, and they're making those at the club. And it's one reason we think that future of the Empire Club Foundation is going to be really bright because our future 20 years ago was non-Anglo-Saxon parts of our society. We have now gotten right in there. We're fully representative of what Canada is today, except younger people and perhaps disenfranchised people. So we want to get those voices involved now too. And that will be done through the Empire Club Foundation, which can have, alternate events. It can have contests. It can have publishing, all kinds of different things that we're anticipating.
If I could, I think one of the other big benefits of the Empire Club and maybe the Canadian Club, but is sort of building a unified civil society. Let me ask you about this if I could. I've gone to Empire Club luncheons, I've gone to Canadian Club lunches, I've gone to the Albany Club, the National Club, the Toronto Club, to different industry clubs. I go to alumni dinners for my schools, etc. And a lot of those other clubs often try to appeal to a smaller demographic. I went to Harvard Business School, and so it's the Harvard Business School Alumni Club, and it's only people that
Right.
went to that. I go to, one of those Albany or National Clubs, and it's people that have got a certain political leaning that are at that event.
Yeah.
And other clubs would be again, only a certain demographic. Only very successful people within banks, for an
Right.
example, or the real estate industry. The Empire
Right.
Club really, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, really tries to attract people from all demographics and from all different sectors of society. And I think that's good. I think that builds a more unified Canada, a more unified Toronto, does it
Yeah.
not? And I also think that one of the benefits is that people become informed. And too often in today's environment, we live in these echo chambers where we only listen to
Yes.
people that agree with us. And sometimes it's frankly good to listen to people that maybe have a different point of view than you. And I do remember a couple of spirited conversations at the dinner tables or the lunch tables at the Empire Club. So tell me, what's the role do you think, am I right, of the Empire Club in building a more informed civil society?
We thought with the advent of the internet that it would break down barriers and create larger social groups that would share a tremendous amount of information and beliefs in common. And of course, as we all know, the internet while it's produced many wonderful things in our contemporary society, has caused many people to go back into a much smaller shell and to only seek out people that actually share their own beliefs. And we know that this is a societal trend which is happening in inflicting particularly young people. At the Empire Club, we like to say, and what you were just talking about sounded like our strategy. It was right on. Um, to actually get people thinking about things that are outside of their own sphere, to accept and acknowledge beliefs that are the opposite of their own. Um, First of all, our belief at the Empire Club is that to hear a belief the opposite of your own is and to not get angry is a sign of intelligence. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of intelligence. If you can understand a belief system that has nothing to do with your own. And that's at the very core of our belief system at the Empire Club. Expose people to different belief systems, to different governments, different ways of running businesses, uh, different ways of dealing with social issues, and they can choose. We're never going to dictate. The Empire Club's job is not to say you should be this and not that. In fact, over our history, you'd be perhaps somewhat surprised that we've had people that are not very savory come to speak at the club, not because they were not savory, but because they were in positions of power. And it was important to show Canadians that belief system so that they could make an opinion about it themselves. So our philosophy is bring in different belief systems, diametrically opposed belief systems, expose people to all of them, and let them become a more informed citizenry they're capable of making better decisions as voters, as citizens of Canada.
There's
That's at the very core of what we're all about.
there's this great book about genius and tracks genius over history, and it says that the places where more genius has occurred are those towns that have had clubs where different people from different demographics have gotten together and met. And they use the example of Scotland when Edinburgh, when some of the best economic thinkers came together, political thinkers came together, and they would come to gentlemen's clubs at the time,
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
would argue like crazy. And it said the key to success was being able to argue like crazy, but then also being able to enjoy a beer afterwards, because you had to be able to argue but still be friendly. And Vienna, where psychiatry and psychology and music, and
right.
it was the mixture of people that were Christian and Jewish that would come together and argue like crazy, but then still be able to talk. And it's
Yeah.
interesting that these times of collisions of different people from different walks of life getting together and being able to discuss different ideas. And it came forward with a really interesting concept that you may or may not agree with, but coming to your comment about ideas and how important ideas are, it called it idea sex. That ideas needed to collide, they needed to reproduce, they needed to mutate, and the only way you
Yeah.
could do that is by having people interact.
Absolutely. Oh, I so agree with that. I mean, that's personally how I think. I mean, I have a personal belief system, like every one of your listeners or viewers. We all have personal belief systems. For example, my personal belief system about religion is that it is probably something that belongs to an earlier phase of humanity's development, and that largely it was the inner voice telling, dictating good and bad, or good, hopefully. But I believe in God as someone, a superior force looking down on humanity and making judgments about us? Absolutely not. I do not. But going to the Empire Club and meeting people that talk to me about the basic beliefs of Muslims, or the basic beliefs of Jews, or the basic beliefs of any religion, I start to understand a lot better, like where they're coming from and why they believe so strongly, without me just concluding, oh well, they're not as intellectually developed as people like that have moved beyond religion. I mean, which is a pretty superficial and incorrect thought, of course, but the Empire Club helped me personally on that particular journey, right? Like understand what makes people tick, because that's going to, as you know, impact all of their behavior, all of their decisions, which is what we call running a business or an organization, right? So it all stems from your base belief systems. So the Empire Club's been really instrumental for me in breaking those barriers down and understanding just because I believe something doesn't mean it's the only way to believe something, right? There's other things that are just as valid, and it's helped me a lot in my personal journey.
We're chatting tonight with Gordon McIvor about the Empire Club and civil society and volunteerism. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. I'm going to ask Gordon if I could to tell us, the 3 or 4 speeches that he'd love to go back and listen to, and that could be changing of all of our lives, of all of our attitudes, of all of our belief systems. The 3 or 4 top. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with some concluding comments from Gordon McIvor about the Empire Club. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting with Gordon McIvor. He's been very involved in the Empire Club and in business for his whole career, and he thinks that it's critically important that we listen to other people from other walks of life, other demographics, other business interests, or just interests, whether they be religious or lifestyle or otherwise. And I certainly agree with that. Gordon, you've been involved in the Empire Club, the Canadian Club, and society for a long time. If there were a couple of speeches that you could go back, maybe ones that you've been to or ones that you wish you would go back to and listen, who would they be?
Wow. So many, so many, because I'm sort of the historian of the club, unofficial historian of the club. So I spend a lot of time looking at these past speeches. I would have loved to have been at the very first speech on December 3rd, 1903, at Webb's Restaurant with this group of 200 very earnest men, convinced they were saving the future of Canada through this club. That must have been a really interesting speech. Would have loved to have heard that. But there's been lots of fun ones. Like apparently Ronald Reagan's speech was just like I was never a huge Ronald Reagan fan, but I certainly recognize he was an important figure in the 20th century. And when he came to the club, he gave a speech that really entertained everyone because Ronald Reagan, if nothing else, was always entertaining. And one of our famous sort of, not in our history books, but everybody knows the story kind of a thing is at the end of the Reagan lunch, the head table was adjourning out of the room, and they came down, and Reagan turned the wrong direction and started going off by himself in the wrong direction. And over the loudspeaker came the voice, President Reagan, please turn left. Please turn left. And Ronald Reagan walked up to the microphone where he had just spoken and said, I've never turned left in my life, and I'm not going to start at the Empire Club of Canada. So, I mean, those type of stories kind of warm our hearts because everybody gets to know them. I actually think that story even made the national news that night in Canada when it occurred. So, I mean, things like that are awful fun, right? But having said that, I've been at a lot of the lunches that I really wanted to be at looking back. I mean, I'm really glad I heard Vladimir Putin. He was a
What an
very
incredible
interesting.
experience that would have been to see and hear. Putin, did you
It,
get to
it,
shake his hand?
yeah, I did, and I also got to see all his bodyguards. It was strange because all of the Russian security wore black leather suit jackets, which I'd never seen before. This was a new thing. I mean, you have black leather jackets and you have suit jackets, but a black leather suit jacket, and there was like 30 of them, and they all wore the same thing. Anyway, that was amazing. Obviously Audrey Hepburn was beyond amazing. Everybody was melting at every word she said. I would have loved to have been there for Alexander Graham Bell, just because, hey, my name is Gordon McIvor. I'm of Scottish origin. I would have loved to have seen this fellow Scot, and talking about one of his great inventions at the Empire Club. And apparently that was a wonderful big day as well. But we continue to have them, Brian. I mean, like world leaders continue to show up at our club when they're passing through Canada. We've had every prime minister, I think,
Who
ever.
who are you looking forward to in the next couple of months?
Well, I mean, I would really like to have I believe that there is a fairly good chance that Mark Carney will probably win the next election. I think the way polls are going, it appears that Canadians feel he has the right experience to meet this particular moment in history, which is called Donald Trump and the threats from the United States. So I mean, if he does win the election, I mean, I think that would be an obvious choice to get him early at the Empire Club to talk about his vision for Canada and why Canada is such an incredible, important nation on the world stage that always punches above their weight, right? Not just in pop music, but in so many areas. I mean, we're one of the most educated nations in the world. So I'd like to get him, but I would like to get also people. to talk about the future of AI and some of the other existential threats. For example, I'd love to get Jeffrey Hinton, who is often known as the godfather of AI, who has come out with some pretty startling um, prognostics on what the way the world is going to go when we have this superior intelligence running us humans, right? So I mean, I'd love to get that, but that's the beauty of the Empire Club. It's endless. The names change every day as the new players come onto the world scene, and I think we probably got more than another century left in us.
Gordon McIvor, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us about volunteerism, about civil society, about the importance of listening to other people's ideas, about the importance of schmoozing and networking and talking to other people, whether at the dinner table, lunch table, or afterwards. And let us know where we go if we want to check out the upcoming events at the Empire Club.
EmpireClub.org and upcoming events. You can go in, you can register virtually, or you can buy a ticket to be there in person and have lunch.
I look
Also,
forward
there are
to
Empire Club nights too. Empire Club nights now, where we have once a month, where it's geared towards younger people, where you come out after work, have a cocktail, and listen to a speaker.
I look forward to coming to hear whoever the future Prime Minister of Canada is at the Empire Club with you, sir.
Absolutely.
That's our show for tonight,
Absolutely.
everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. And I try hard to bring you different people with different ideas so that, albeit virtually, you can be exposed to a whole bunch of interesting people, sort of like the Empire Club on in a small scale. Stay with us, everyone, every night at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. Good night, everybody.